My name is Elizabeth Sterling. For 40 years, I was a rare book archivist at the city's oldest university, a woman whose life was dedicated to the preservation of stories and the meticulous verification of facts. I believed in the quiet, tangible truth of a primary source document. My own life was a simple, well-documented story of love, loss, and the quiet joy of family. That story was a lie. I was living in a masterpiece of fiction, and the author was my own brother. It all began to unravel the day my 9-year-old nephew, Leo, his face pale with a secret he did not understand, pressed his late mother's old, forgotten cell phone into my hand. That phone, a ghost from the past, contained a horrific story in its digital archives. It held all the evidence of a terrible plot, a conspiracy of greed and deceit aimed at my terminally ill brother, a plot in which his beautiful, grieving new wife was not a victim, but the ruthless mastermind. Before the sickness and before Sophia, my life was a quiet harbor of contentment. After my husband Richard passed away, my world, which had once been a grand, sprawling map of our shared adventures, became a much smaller, more intimate chart, its coordinates defined by 2 points of light: my younger brother, Robert, and his son, my nephew, Leo. I lived in a beautiful, rambling Victorian home in a historic Boston suburb, the house Richard and I had bought as newlyweds. After Robert's wife, my dear friend Laura, died in a tragic accident when Leo was just a toddler, my brother and nephew became the beating heart of my home. Robert, a gentle, brilliant architect, was a man who designed beautiful, sturdy structures for others, but had struggled to rebuild his own. He was a wonderful father, but a man adrift in his own quiet, persistent grief. Leo was my joy. At 9 years old, he was a whirlwind of energy, with his mother's bright, curious eyes and his father's kind, thoughtful soul. Our lives were a comfortable, interwoven tapestry. Robert and Leo lived just a few blocks away, but my house was their second home. Leo would spend most afternoons with me, his school books spread across my kitchen table, his laughter echoing in rooms that had grown too quiet. We were a small, slightly broken, but deeply loving family. We were each other's safe harbor. I believed our bonds were unbreakable. Robert met Sophia at a charity gala for the Boston Symphony. He came to my house the next day, a different man. The gentle melancholy that was his constant companion had been replaced by a vibrant, almost boyish excitement. He spoke of her as if she were a revelation. She was a wealth manager, he said, a partner at a prestigious downtown firm. She was not just beautiful and intelligent. She was, he said with a sense of awe, so full of life. When I met her, I understood. Sophia was a force of nature. She was stunning, with a radiant smile and a confident, easy grace that was captivating. She arrived for our first meeting with a thoughtful, perfectly chosen gift for everyone: a rare architectural monograph for Robert, a sophisticated Lego robotics kit for Leo, and a beautiful flowering gardenia for me. "Elizabeth," she said, her voice warm and melodic as she took my hand, "it is a true honor. Robert speaks of you as his anchor. I can see why. There is such a wonderful peace in this home." She was a master of charm. She listened, her gaze full of rapt attention, as I spoke about my late husband. She praised Robert's architectural work with a knowledgeable, professional admiration that clearly thrilled him. And she was magical with Leo, getting down on the floor to help him with his robot, her laughter filling the living room. Robert, a man who had been half living for years, came alive in her presence. He smiled more. He laughed more. He seemed to stand a little taller. How could I not be happy for him? I saw my beloved brother emerging from a long, dark tunnel into the light. The small, nagging voice in the back of my mind that whispered, "This is all too perfect," was one I chose, for Robert's sake, to ignore. They married a year later in a beautiful, tasteful ceremony in the public garden. Sophia moved into Robert's home, and for a while, everything seemed idyllic. She was a loving wife and a wonderful, attentive stepmother to Leo. She seamlessly became the vibrant, a capable center of their household. It was about 6 months after the wedding that the illness began in Robert. It started insidiously, a persistent fatigue he dismissed as stress. Then came other, more alarming symptoms: a loss of appetite, a dull, aching pain in his back, a slight, almost imperceptible yellowing of his eyes. The diagnosis, when it came after weeks of tests, was a brutal, shocking death sentence. late-stage, inoperable liver cancer. The doctors gave him, at most, a year. The world shattered. My brilliant, gentle, kind brother was dying. In the chaos of grief and fear that followed, Sophia was a pillar of strength. She was magnificent. She took a leave of absence from her high-powered job to become his full-time caregiver. She managed the doctors, the medications, the insurance. She was a fierce, tireless advocate for him, her competence a beacon in our darkest hour. "You and Leo need to focus on one thing," she told me, her own eyes filled with a convincing, sorrowful resolve. "You need to focus on loving Robert. Let me handle the ugly practical things. Let me carry that burden for this family." We were so grateful. My brother, in his weakened, terrified state, clung to her strength. I, overwhelmed by my own anticipatory grief and my desperate desire to make my brother's last months peaceful, saw her as a godsend. We trusted her completely. We handed her the keys to our lives, our finances, our future, believing she was the one person strong enough to navigate us through the storm. With Robert's prognosis grim and his health declining rapidly, Sophia's management of our affairs took on a new, urgent tone. She called a family meeting at my house, her face a mask of loving, practical concern. "I have been doing a deep dive into the finances," she began, her voice soft and somber, "and I am afraid we have a serious problem. Robert's insurance is excellent, but it will not cover the experimental treatments and palliative care options that could give him more time and more comfort. We are looking at astronomical out-of-pocket expenses." She laid out a spreadsheet, a terrifying document that showed our family savings being completely depleted within months. "There is, however, a solution," she continued, her tone shifting to one of gentle, persuasive logic. "Robert's primary asset, this beautiful house, is worth a great deal of money. If we were to sell it now, we could use the proceeds to fund the best possible care for him, to ensure his final months are without pain and without financial stress. And," she added, her eyes shining with a feigned noble light, "the remaining funds would secure your future and Leo's for years to come." Robert, frail and exhausted in his armchair, just shook his head weakly. "My home? It is just a house, my love," Sophia said, rushing to his side, taking his thin hand in hers. "Your life, your comfort is what matters. We are doing this for you. We are doing this because we love you." I was horrified. "Sophia, this is his home. This is where he wants to be. We cannot sell it out from under him while he is—" I could not finish the sentence. Her eyes filled with tears, a masterful performance of a wife's desperate anguish. "Elizabeth, please," she begged, her voice breaking. "Do not fight me on this. Do you want to be the one who denies him the care that could ease his suffering? Do you want to put your sentimental attachment to a building ahead of your own brother's life?" It was the most brilliant, cruel, and effective argument imaginable. She had framed a monstrous, greedy act as the ultimate act of love and sacrifice. She had made me the villain, the cold-hearted sister who was standing in the way of her dying brother's comfort. Robert, too weak and sick to argue, just looked at me, his eyes pleading for me to end the conflict. I was checkmated. The pressure in the weeks that followed was relentless. Sophia treated the sale of the house as a settled matter, a medical and financial necessity. She brought in real estate agents for appraisals, staging experts who spoke in hushed, respectful tones about maximizing the property's appeal. They walked through my brother's home, the home he had shared with his late wife, the home he was dying in, their footsteps a ghoulish, predatory dance. I tried to resist. I tried to argue with Robert when we had rare moments alone, but he was too ill, too exhausted. "Just let her handle it, Lizzie," he would whisper. "I am too tired to fight." Sophia and I had a final, quiet confrontation on the porch one evening. "I know this is hard for you," she said, her voice a silken web of understanding. "But you are thinking with your heart, not your head. I am a professional. My only goal is to protect this family. You have to trust me." In the face of my brother's decline and my own emotional exhaustion, my resistance crumbled. What if she was right? What if I was just being a sentimental old woman? The doubt she had so expertly planted began to take root. She brought me the papers a few days later. It was a durable power of attorney, giving her complete legal authority over Robert's affairs, an authority he was no longer capable of exercising himself. It needed my signature as a witness, and there were preliminary listing agreements for the house. I looked at my brother, asleep in his chair, his breathing shallow, his face a pale, waxy mask of the handsome man he had once been. I thought of the experimental treatments, the promise of more time, of less pain. My love for him, my desperate, grieving love, was the weapon she used to deliver the final blow. I signed the papers. My signature was a testament to my own defeat. I had surrendered the fortress. I had willingly opened the gates to the enemy, believing she was our only salvation. With complete control now in her hands, a subtle but chilling change came over Sophia. Her performance of the loving, grieving wife continued for the outside world, but within the walls of the house, her guard began to drop. She was often on her phone, her back to me, her voice a low, urgent murmur of business, of transactions and wire transfers. The sale of the house was proceeding with a speed that felt indecent. Leo, my quiet, observant nephew, was the first to notice the cracks in her facade. He had grown withdrawn and sad, and would often come to my house seeking a quiet refuge from the tense, somber atmosphere of his own home. "Aunt Lizzie," he said to me one afternoon, his voice a small whisper as he helped me in my garden. "I do not like Sophia's friends." "What friends, sweetheart?" I asked. "The man who comes when Daddy is sleeping," he said, his eyes wide and serious. "He is not a doctor. They talk in the study, and they always close the door. They talk about money. And they laugh." A cold dread, sharp and sudden, pierced through my grief-stricken haze. A man. They laugh. The words echoed in my mind, but it was what he said next that truly terrified me. "Last night," he whispered, "I heard them talking. Sophia said that as soon as the house sells, she is going to move Daddy to a special hospice in the mountains, a place where he can be at peace. A hospice in the mountains." The phrase was so full of a picturesque cinematic finality that it sounded utterly false. It sounded like a place people disappear. For the first time since Robert's diagnosis, a different feeling began to cut through my sorrow. It was not grief, it was suspicion. A cold, sharp, and terrifying suspicion. I was a woman who had spent a lifetime verifying facts, and the story I was living was suddenly full of holes, of dark, unexplained inconsistencies. But I had no proof. I had only the vague, fearful words of a 9-year-old boy, and I had the sinking, sickening feeling that the woman we had entrusted with my brother's life was not a savior, but something else entirely. My nephew's words had planted a seed of ice in my heart. The man who comes when Daddy is sleeping. They talk about money. And they laugh. It was a child's observation, but it held the chilling weight of an accusation. My grief, which had been a thick, suffocating fog, began to thin, replaced by the sharp, clear air of suspicion. I started to watch. For years, my nights had been quiet, restless affairs. Now, they became a vigil. I would sit in the darkness of my room, the door slightly ajar, listening to the sounds of the house. For a week, there was nothing but the familiar creaks and groans of an old home settling. I began to wonder if I was losing my mind, if I was letting a child's fantasy poison my thoughts. Then, one Thursday night, well after midnight, I heard it. The soft, almost inaudible click of the front door. I crept from my room to the top of the grand central staircase, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. I peered down through the ornate balusters into the dimly lit foyer below. Sophia was there, dressed in a silk robe, her face illuminated by the light of her phone. She was speaking in a low, hushed whisper to a man I had never seen before. He was tall and impeccably dressed in a dark suit, his face sharp and predatory in the shadows. They were not talking about medicine or palliative care. They were looking at a set of blueprints spread across the hall table, the blueprints to my brother's house. I could not make out all their words, but I caught snippets, sharp, ugly fragments that cut through the silence. "Liquidity is the key," Sophia whispered. "The market is peaking," the man replied. "Once he is gone, the trust gives you sole authority." And then, the word that made my blood run cold. "The timeline is accelerating faster than we planned." I saw the man slip a thick manila envelope to Sophia, which she quickly hid inside her robe. He gave her a thin, cold smile, touched her arm in a gesture that was far too familiar for a simple business associate, and then slipped out the front door as silently as he had arrived. I crept back to my bed, my body trembling. Leo was not imagining things. The shadow man was real. The conspiracy was real. My brother was not just dying. He was being targeted. The next morning, I tried to gently probe. "Sophia, my dear," I said, my voice a carefully constructed imitation of casual curiosity. "I thought I heard a visitor very late last night. I hope everything is all right." She looked up from the newspaper, her eyes clear and untroubled, her smile perfectly in place. "Oh, but that was just Dr. Evans, a neurological specialist," she lied, the fabrication rolling off her tongue with terrifying ease. "He was on call at the hospital nearby and wanted to drop off some new research papers on Robert's condition. I did not want to wake you. You need your rest, Elizabeth." The lie was so smooth, so plausible. If I had not seen it with my own eyes, I would have believed her. I was not just dealing with a greedy woman. I was dealing with a masterful pathological liar, with the evidence of her secret meetings confirming my worst fears. Sophia's next move felt less like a plan for my brother's care and more like an act of financial aggression. The house was officially put on the market. The beautiful, custom-designed "for sale" sign was a garish wound on the manicured lawn. To justify this indecent haste, Sophia invented a miracle. She called a family meeting, her face alight with a brilliant, tearful hope. "I have been consulting with specialists around the world," she announced, her voice trembling with a flawless performance of emotion. "And I have found something, a private experimental clinic in Switzerland. They are doing groundbreaking work with targeted immunotherapy for Robert's type of cancer. It is not a cure, but they have had incredible success in extending life, in giving people years." Robert, frail and weak in his armchair, looked up, a flicker of genuine hope in his tired eyes. "Really?" "Yes, my love," she said, rushing to his side. "The problem," she continued, her expression becoming one of grave maternal concern, "is that it is astronomically expensive, and they require the full payment up front to reserve a place for you. It is a fortune, Robert. A fortune we do not have." She let the implication hang in the air. The house. The sale of the house was now inextricably linked to this new, miraculous hope. It was the price of a life. It was a brilliant, monstrously cruel trap. How could I object now? How could I, the loving sister, stand in the way of my brother's last, best chance at survival? To question the sale of the house would be to question his very life. I had to play along. I had to sit with the real estate agent, my face a mask of supportive grief as she discussed offers and timelines. I had to listen to Sophia on the phone, her voice full of a false, noble desperation as she told friends and family about the race against time to fund Robert's treatment. The emotional toll of the charade was a slow-acting poison in my own soul. Robert's health, however, did not stabilize. It declined with a terrifying, unnatural speed. The new medications Sophia was administering, supposedly from the Swiss clinic, seemed to weaken him, to drag him deeper into a confused, lethargic fog. She was his sole caregiver, his gatekeeper. She would politely but firmly ask me to leave the room when it was time for his treatments. I began to suspect the unthinkable. She was not just robbing him. She was accelerating his decline. She needed him to die before the house sale was finalized, before any real questions could be asked, before he might have a moment of lucidity and strength to contradict her plans. The end came on a bleak, rainy Monday. September 29th, 2025. I was with him, holding his hand. Sophia was there, of course, a statue of wifely devotion at the other side of the bed. Robert's breathing was shallow, his eyes closed. For a moment, his eyes flickered open and he looked at me. There was a profound, heartbreaking lucidity in his gaze. He tried to speak, but only a dry, rasping sound came out. He squeezed my hand, a faint final pressure, and then he was gone. Sophia's grief was a storm, a loud theatrical performance that filled the quiet room. My own grief was a silent, collapsed star in my chest. It was real, a profound, bottomless ache, but beneath it, a cold, hard, and terrible clarity was beginning to form. My brother was dead, and now his widow, and my nephew's guardian, was in absolute control. A few days after the quiet, tasteful funeral that Sophia orchestrated, her lawyer called us to his office for a reading of the will. I sat in the plush chair, expecting to hear the familiar terms of the will Robert and I had drafted together years ago, the one that named me as Leo's legal guardian in the event of his death. But the lawyer did not read that will. He read a new one, a document that had been drafted and signed just 2 months prior, shortly after Robert's diagnosis. It was a short, brutally efficient document. It named Sophia as the sole executrix of his estate and the sole legal guardian of his son, Leo. It left his entire personal fortune, his half of the house, and his son to her. My name was not mentioned once. I stared at the document, at my brother's weak, spidery signature at the bottom. I had been legally and completely excised from my own family. After the funeral, after the reading of the will, the woman who had played the part of a loving, grieving wife for so long vanished. In her place was a cool, efficient, and utterly ruthless businesswoman. Sophia was now the sole executrix of Robert's estate and Leo's guardian. She was in charge, and she no longer needed to pretend. Her tone with me became dismissive, her patience gone. When I tried to ask questions about the estate, about the proceeds from the house sale, which was still moving forward, she would cut me off. "Elizabeth, with all due respect, you are not a party to this anymore," she would say, her voice as cold and hard as a banker's heart. "Robert put me in charge because he knew you would not be able to handle it in your grief. You are too emotional. Please, let me take care of the business." She began a quiet, effective campaign to paint me as unhinged. She would tell our few remaining family friends that my grief was complicating things, that I was becoming paranoid, and that I was having trouble accepting Robert's final wishes. She was not just taking my brother's money, she was stealing my credibility, my sanity, my very place in the world. I was a stranger in my own family, a ghost at their feast. I was powerless, I had no legal standing. I had no proof of her deception. I had only my own suspicions, and the narrative she had so expertly crafted around me was that of a bitter, hysterical, and unreliable old woman. The day the moving trucks arrived was the day I hit the bottom. The sale of the house had closed with a speed that was obscene. I stood in my own home, a place I had always believed would one day be mine and Leo's, and I watched as strangers packed my brother's life into cardboard boxes. Sophia was there, directing the movers with a brisk, unsentimental efficiency. She was not packing memories, she was liquidating assets. That evening, after the trucks were gone, she sat me down in the empty, echoing living room. "Elizabeth," she began, her voice devoid of all its former warmth. "Now that Robert's affairs are settled, it is time to discuss the future. Leo and I will be moving into a new condominium downtown. It is a more secure, modern environment for a young boy." "And what about me?" I asked, my voice a hollow whisper. "I have taken the liberty of looking into some options for you," she said, pulling a glossy brochure from her purse. "There is a very highly rated retirement community just outside the city. It has full-time nursing staff and a very robust activities schedule. It would be the perfect, safe place for you. You will not have to worry about a thing." The words were a death sentence. She was not just casting me out of the family, she was putting me in a cage. She was going to take my brother's money, take my nephew, and put me in a home to be forgotten, a crazy old aunt whose paranoid stories no one would ever believe. The moving truck containing the last of Robert's and Leo's things pulled away from the curb. I stood at the window and watched it disappear down the street, taking with it the last remnants of the life I had known. I had lost my brother, I had lost his home, and now I was losing his son. My defeat was absolute. The pain of it was a vast, empty, silent scream. I had nothing left to fight for, and no weapons left to fight with. I was completely and utterly broken. I was a ghost in the shell of my own life. The days following the sale of the house were a blur of numb, quiet packing. I moved mechanically through the rooms, wrapping my brother's books and my sister-in-law's china in paper, each object a painful testament to a life that had been stolen. My defeat was total. I had accepted my fate, the quiet, beige room in the retirement community Sophia had chosen for me, a place where I would slowly fade into a forgotten, senile old woman, just as she had planned. The awakening, when it came, was not a clap of thunder, but a small secret gift delivered by a child's trembling hands. It was the night before the final movers were scheduled to arrive. I was in my room, sitting on the floor amidst a sea of cardboard boxes, when Leo slipped in. His face was pale, his eyes wide with a fear and a resolve that were far too old for a 9-year-old. "Aunt Lizzie," he whispered, closing the door behind him, "I have a goodbye present for you. It is a secret." He pushed a small, cold object into my hand. It was an old smartphone, its case a faded pink, covered in cartoon cat stickers. I recognized it instantly. It was his mother's. It was Laura's. I keep it under my bed, he said, his voice a torrent of whispered words. Sophia does not know. I charge it sometimes just to look at the pictures of Mommy. Mommy told me to always keep my secrets safe in here. He looked up at me, his eyes pleading. I think her secrets are in here. Maybe they can help you. I do not want you to go away. He hugged me tight and was gone, a silent little ghost. I sat in the darkness, the cold weight of the phone in my hand, a ghost in the machine, a voice from the grave. With a sense of sacred, trembling dread, I found an old charger and plugged it in. The screen flickered to life, and with it, the truth. The phone was a digital time capsule of the last year of my sister-in-law's life. It was protected by a passcode, but Leo, in his innocent love, had already told me what it was, his own birthday. I opened it, and I began to read. It was all there. A meticulous, hidden archive. Laura, my quiet, gentle sister-in-law, had been a far more astute observer than any of us had known. There were screenshots of suspicious financial statements from my brother's accounts, saved in a hidden folder. There were emails to a fraud investigator, her tone growing more frantic, detailing her suspicions about Sophia, who was at that time just Robert's wealth manager. But it was the saved text messages that stopped my heart, a long, chilling thread with a divorce lawyer. She is isolating him from his family, Laura had written. She has convinced him I am unstable. She is moving his money into accounts I cannot access. The final texts were sent on the day of her accident, one to her lawyer. I have the final proof. Bank records. She is running a Ponzi scheme. I am going to confront Robert tonight. He has to believe me. And the last message, sent just an hour before she died, to my brother's phone. Robert, we need to talk urgently. Sophia is not who you think she is. She is dangerous. Do not let her know I am coming to see you. The car accident had not been an accident. Laura had been on her way to expose Sophia, and she had been silenced. My brother had not just fallen for a gold digger. He had married his first wife's murderer. The grief and despair that had crippled me for months was incinerated in a blast of pure, white-hot rage. The pain did not vanish, but it was transformed, forged into a weapon. Sophia had not just manipulated a grieving family, she had likely murdered her way into it. The quiet, passive archivist, the defeated old woman, died that night. In her place was a woman with a 40-year understanding of evidence, a woman who now held the primary source document of a murder in her hand. My mind, once foggy with the sorrow she had so expertly cultivated, was now a machine of cold, sharp clarity. Every event of the past 2 years replayed itself, but this time in the correct, horrifying context. Robert's sudden, aggressive illness, Sophia's total, suffocating control over his treatment, the shadow man Leo had seen visiting, the hospice in the mountains. It was not a plan to steal our money. It was the second act of a play that had begun with Laura's death, and its finale was to be Robert's death and my own quiet, convenient disposal. I did not weep for my brother. I would do that later. That night, I planned a war in his name. I knew I could not go to the police alone. I was a woman who was about to be put in a home. A woman whose own family believed her to be paranoid. They would see an old phone and a hysterical theory. I needed a general, an advocate, a weapon of my own. I needed the best lawyer in the city. Getting out of the house was my first challenge. I used the persona they had created for me one last time. The next morning, I feigned a complete emotional breakdown. I told Sophia that I wanted to visit my late husband Richard's grave one final time before I was moved to the new home. I wept. I pleaded. I was the very picture of a sentimental, grieving woman lost in her memories. It was a request so steeped in pathos that Sophia, on the verge of her ultimate victory, could not refuse it without looking like a monster. She agreed, sending me in a taxi, no doubt relieved to have me out of the way for a few hours. But I did not go to the cemetery. I went downtown, to the gleaming steel and glass tower that housed the offices of Marcus Thorne, a man whose reputation was a legend in the city's legal circles. He was known as a ruthless, brilliant litigator who specialized in complex, high-stakes fraud and contested estates. He was a man who did not suffer fools, and his initial skepticism when I was shown into his office was a palpable force. I saw what he saw, an elderly, well-dressed woman, her face etched with grief, about to tell him a wild story. I did not waste his time with emotion. I simply placed Laura's old, pink-cased phone on the polished surface of his vast desk. My name is Elizabeth Sterling, I said, my voice clear and steady. My brother, Robert Sterling, is being systematically robbed and, I believe, slowly murdered by his wife, Sophia, and the evidence is on that phone. For the next hour, he and a tech expert from his firm went through the phone's contents. I watched as his expression shifted from professional skepticism to intense focus, to a kind of grim, controlled fury. He read Laura's frantic texts. He saw the financial statements she had saved. He understood. My God, he said, looking up at me, his eyes now full of a warrior's respect. This is not just a case, Mrs. Sterling. This is a conspiracy. You are in incredible danger. He leaned forward, all business. We are going to fight this. But to do it, you must be brave. You must go back there and let them believe they are winning. We need to give her the rope, and she will hang herself with it. From this moment on, you are not just my client. You are my lead investigator. Returning to the house that afternoon was the hardest thing I had ever done. But I was no longer a victim. I was an operative with a mission. On Marcus Thorne's advice, I agreed to the move to the retirement community without another word of protest. I packed my boxes with a quiet, heartbreaking resignation that they completely misread as defeat. My compliance was the perfect camouflage. Sophia, believing I was a solved problem, became arrogant, careless. The move to the new home was my chance to get out from under her direct surveillance, a neutral territory from which I could help direct the war. Marcus's team was a silent, invisible army working in the background. A private investigator began a deep dive into Sophia's past and into the background of the shadow man, whose name we had pulled from a text on Laura's phone. The forensic accountants, using the account numbers from the phone as their starting point, began to unravel the complex web of shell corporations Sophia had created. My role was to play the part of a woman who had accepted her fate. I toured the retirement community with Sophia, nodding with a vacant smile at the beige walls and cheerful activities schedule. I made her feel completely, utterly victorious. Her overconfidence was making her sloppy, and every mistake she made was a piece of evidence for us. The evidence we gathered in the following weeks was a tidal wave. The private investigator discovered the shadow man was a disgraced financial advisor who had lost his license for running a Ponzi scheme. He was Sophia's partner. The accountants found the offshore accounts where the money from Robert's liquidated assets and the proceeds from the house sale was being funneled. They also uncovered the truth about Robert's experimental clinic in Switzerland. It did not exist. It was a fiction she had created, complete with a fake website, to justify the immense cash withdrawals. She was not just robbing my brother. She had been systematically draining his accounts for months under the guise of paying for a miracle cure that was never real. The final, most damning piece came from a discreet inquiry the investigator made into Laura's accident. The police report had been straightforward, but a local mechanic remembered the car. He had worked on it a week before the crash and had told Laura her brake lines were dangerously worn. She had made an appointment to have them replaced the very next day. She never made it to that appointment. Sophia, who was living with them at the time as Robert's advisor, had offered to take the car to a specialist she knew instead. The car came back, and a week later, the brakes failed on a rainy night. It was all there, a clear, cold, and undeniable pattern of fraud, conspiracy, and murder. The moving day was set. It was the deadline. The day Sophia planned to have me safely tucked away in a home, with Leo under her sole control, and the last of my brother's fortune transferred beyond the reach of the law. The night before the move, Marcus Thorne called me on a secure line I now kept. "We have it all, Elizabeth," he said, his voice a low, triumphant hum. "The district attorney has been fully briefed. They are ready to move. Tomorrow is the day. We are not just going to stop her. We are going to dismantle her." I looked at the packed boxes that filled my quiet, empty house. They were not a symbol of my defeat anymore. They were the props for the final act of a play in which the villain was about to take her final, dramatic bow. The morning of the move arrived, gray and heavy, the Boston sky weeping a cold, persistent drizzle. The house, my brother's home, was a scene of organized chaos, a place being systematically erased. Professional movers, their faces impassive, moved with a brisk efficiency, carrying boxes of memories out into the damp air. Each box that crossed the threshold felt like a piece of my heart being carried away. Sophia was in her element, a commander directing her troops. She moved through the house with a clipboard and a triumphant, energetic grace, her voice a sharp, clear instrument of authority. She was not just moving house. She was conquering a territory, and this was her victory parade. I played my part as the defeated, heartbroken woman being sent into exile. I sat in a designated chair in the corner of the living room, a quiet, pathetic figure in the eye of the storm. Inside, I was a coiled spring of terror and resolve. I was in constant, discreet contact with my lawyer, Marcus Thorne, through a secure messaging app on a small, hidden phone. His instructions were simple. Wait for my signal. Let them believe they have won. The trap is set. Leo was my shadow, his small face pale and his eyes wide with a grief he could not articulate. He refused to leave my side, his hand clutching mine with a desperate strength. I don't want you to go, Aunt Lizzie, he would whisper, his voice trembling. I know, my love, I would whisper back, my heart aching for him. But everything is going to be all right. I promise. It was a promise I was about to risk everything to keep. The shadow man, Sophia's partner in crime, arrived mid-morning. His name, I now knew from the investigator's report, was Julian Croft, a disgraced and disbarred financial advisor. He was here to oversee the final transfer of assets, the digital looting that would accompany the physical one. He and Sophia would periodically retreat into the study, their heads bent together over a laptop, their laughter a low, ugly sound of shared greed. By early afternoon, the house was a hollow, echoing shell of what it had been. Only a few pieces of furniture remained in the living room, creating a strange, makeshift stage for the final act. The movers, many of whom were, I knew, undercover police officers, were taking their final instructions from Sophia. She approached me, a sheaf of papers in her hand, her face a perfect mask of gentle, final authority. Her partner, Julian Croft, stood behind her, a silent, smirking gargoyle. Elizabeth, she said, her voice soft, just a few final documents to sign for the retirement community's intake process and the final asset transfer. Once this is done, the car will be here to take you to your new home. It is all over. This was the moment, the final overt act of the conspiracy. My phone, hidden in my pocket, vibrated once. It was the signal from Marcus. The entire house was live. The police were listening, watching, and waiting for my cue. I looked at the papers she held out. They were a legal cage, a final set of bars to lock me away forever. I looked at my nephew, Leo, his eyes filled with tears. I thought of my brother, Robert, and his gentle, trusting nature. I thought of his wife, Laura, and her frantic, final text messages. The time for performance was over. No, I said, my voice quiet but carrying in the silent, empty room. Sophia froze, a flicker of irritation crossing her face. I am sorry? I said no, I repeated, my voice gaining a strength I did not know I possessed. I will not be signing anything, and I will not be going anywhere. The atmosphere in the room crackled with a sudden, sharp tension. Sophia's mask of gentle authority slipped, revealing the cold, hard face of a predator whose prey was refusing to cooperate. Elizabeth, do not be difficult, she said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous tone. We have been through this. You are not well. This is for your own good. I have never been more well in my life, Sophia, I said. Standing up from my chair, I felt a lifetime of quiet, archival precision focusing into a single, sharp point. In fact, I have been doing a bit of archiving of my own lately. I have been reading a fascinating story. It is about a woman named Laura. At the mention of her name, a look of pure animal panic flashed in Sophia's eyes. My late sister-in-law, I continued, my voice steady and clear. She was a wonderful woman, very meticulous. She kept excellent records. I know this because I found her old phone. I pulled the pink-cased phone from my pocket and held it up. It was a simple, innocuous object, but in that moment, it was a loaded gun. I have read her text messages, Sophia, I said, my eyes locked on hers. The ones to her lawyer about a certain wealth manager who was running a Ponzi scheme and stealing her husband's money. I have read her emails to the fraud investigator, and I have read her final, frantic message, sent just an hour before her brakes failed on that rainy night, the message that said you were dangerous. This is insane, Julian Croft blustered, stepping forward. You are a crazy old woman. Am I? I asked, my voice cold as ice. Then, perhaps you can explain the money you and Sophia have been laundering through the Shell Corporation in the Bahamas, the one you used to hide the funds from the sale of this very house. Or maybe you can explain the experimental Swiss clinic that does not exist, the one you used as a pretext to drain my brother's accounts while he was dying. Every word was a hammer blow, dismantling their entire web of lies. Sophia stared at me, her face a mask of disbelief and pure, unadulterated hatred. The woman she had dismissed as a senile, sentimental fool was quoting back her own crimes with the precision of a prosecuting attorney. "You have no proof," Sophia hissed, her voice a raw, desperate rasp. "Oh, but I do," I said. I held up the phone. "It is all in here, Sophia. A ghost in the machine. Laura's final damning report." That was what broke her. The evidence was not a memory or an accusation. It was a physical object, a digital archive of her crimes. In a single explosive movement, she lunged, not to attack me, but to destroy the evidence. She clawed at my hand, her fingers like talons, trying to wrench the phone away from me. "Give me that!" she shrieked, her voice a raw, ugly sound of pure panic. It was a brief, pathetic, and desperate struggle. I held onto the phone with a strength I did not know I possessed, a strength fueled by 40 years of quiet resolve. Leo screamed. Julian Croft, her partner in crime, made a move to help her, his own panic overriding all reason. But before he could take a step, the front door of the house burst open. The two movers, who had been standing on the porch, stepped inside. They were not movers. They were police detectives. Behind them, my lawyer, Marcus Thorne, walked into the room, his face a grim, victorious mask. "It is over, Sophia," he said, his voice calm and final. The sight of the police, of the trap sprung so perfectly, made Sophia and Julian freeze. The struggle was over. The alliance, forged in greed and deceit, shattered in an instant. "This was all her," Julian Croft shouted, pointing a trembling finger at Sophia. "She was the mastermind. I was just a consultant. I had no idea about any of this other stuff." Sophia spun on him, her face a contortion of pure venom. "You liar," she screamed. "You were with me every step of the way. You were the one who found Robert, you pathetic parasite." They were still screaming accusations at each other as the detectives moved in, cuffing them and reading them their rights. Their entire, elaborate conspiracy dissolved into a pathetic, ugly chorus of mutual blame. Marcus Thorne walked over to me. He gently took the old phone from my hand. "I believe this belongs in an evidence bag," he said with a small, respectful smile. I looked at my nephew, who was now clinging to my leg, his terrified sobs slowly subsiding. I looked around the empty, echoing room, a place that had been the site of so much pain, and now a place of profound and total victory. The story Laura had tried to tell all those years ago had finally, at long last, been heard. The explosion of the climax was followed by a quiet, efficient, and methodical storm. As Sophia and her partner, Julian Croft, were led away in handcuffs, their final, ugly accusations against each other still hanging in the air, the empty house was transformed from a place of painful memories into a formal crime scene. The police officers, who had shed their roles as movers, were now calm professionals, securing the scene, bagging evidence, and taking preliminary statements. My first and only thought was for Leo. He was clinging to me, his small body trembling from the shock of what he had witnessed. A kind, plain-clothed female detective, who introduced herself as a specialist from the Child Advocacy Unit, knelt down beside us. She spoke to him in a low, gentle voice, her presence a small island of calm in the chaotic sea of the aftermath. Marcus Thorne, my lawyer, was my rock. While I focused on comforting my nephew, he handled everything else. He immediately began the legal process to have me declared Leo's temporary emergency guardian, using the overwhelming evidence of Sophia's conspiracy and Robert's incapacitation to invalidate the fraudulent will. There was no question, no debate. The shell that was my family had been shattered, and Leo and I were the only two pieces left to put back together. That night, we did not stay in the cold, empty house. Marcus arranged for us to stay in a quiet, comfortable hotel suite. For the first time in months, Leo and I were safe, together, and free from the suffocating presence of Sophia's lies. As he finally fell into an exhausted sleep in the bed next to mine, I held the old, pink-cased phone in my hand, a sacred relic. It was a ghost that had come back not to haunt, but to heal, to liberate. The war was over. The long, difficult work of rebuilding had just begun. The legal process was a slow, grinding machine, but its conclusion was never in doubt. The evidence contained on Laura's phone was a digital bombshell. It provided the prosecution with a perfect, self-documented narrative of Sophia's crimes, written in her victim's own words. The trial was a sensation, a chilling story of a Black Widow predator who had used a family's grief as her hunting ground. The forensic accountants, guided by the information from the phone, had unraveled a vast international web of fraud and money laundering. The private investigators' work provided the human element, connecting Sophia to a string of other convenient deaths and disappearances of wealthy, vulnerable men. The most powerful moment of the trial came when Laura's final, frantic text messages were read aloud in the courtroom. A dead woman's voice, reaching out from beyond the grave, testified against her own murderer. Sophia's defense was non-existent. Faced with the mountain of digital, financial, and circumstantial evidence, she was rendered silent. Her partner, Julian Croft, in a desperate attempt to save himself, turned state's evidence, providing a full, detailed confession of their entire scheme, from the Ponzi scheme that had ruined them to the plot against my brother. The verdicts were swift and severe. Julian Croft was convicted of conspiracy to commit fraud and accessory after the fact to murder, receiving a sentence of 25 years. Sophia, the mastermind, the murderer, was found guilty on all counts: conspiracy, grand larceny, and most importantly, the first-degree murder of Laura Sterling. The judge, calling her a creature of profound and remorseless evil, sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Justice, for Laura, for Robert, and for our family, was finally, absolutely served. With the trial over, the legal and emotional landscape of our lives had been permanently altered. The fraudulent will Sophia had created was officially nullified. Robert's original will, the one that named me as Leo's guardian, was reinstated. The house, which Sophia had sold to one of her own shell companies, was seized as a criminal asset and returned to the estate, to me and to Leo. We were left with a choice. We could sell the house, a place tainted by so much pain and deceit, and start somewhere new. Or we could reclaim it. It was Leo who made the decision. "This is Mommy Laura's house," he said one day, his voice quiet but firm, "and it is Daddy Robert's house. And it is your house, Aunt Lizzie. It is our house. We can't let the monster win." And so, we moved back in. It was an act of defiance, an act of reclamation. We began the slow, deliberate process of healing the home itself. We donated every piece of furniture Sophia had brought into it. We painted over the cold, sterile colors with warm, bright ones. We filled the quiet rooms with music, with laughter, and with the happy, chaotic clutter of a young boy's life. We were not just rebuilding a home. We were rebuilding a family, a new family of two, bound by a shared past and a fierce, protective love. In the years that followed, our new life took shape. I was no longer just a retired archivist. I was a full-time parent again, a role I embraced with a gratitude and a wisdom I had not possessed as a younger woman. I attended school plays and parent-teacher conferences. I helped with homework and patched up scraped knees. I was given a second chance at motherhood, and it was a gift I cherished every single day. My experience also gave me a new purpose. Working with Marcus Thorne, I used a portion of the assets we had recovered to establish a small foundation in my sister-in-law's name, Laura's Light. It is a nonprofit that provides funding for digital forensic investigations in cases of suspected domestic fraud and suspicious deaths. So often, the truth is hidden in the digital ghosts people leave behind, and our foundation gives a voice to those who can no longer speak for themselves. The archivist in me had found her life's most important collection to curate and protect. Leo thrived. Free from the toxic environment of Sophia's manipulation and surrounded by the truth of his parents' love, he grew into a kind, intelligent, and resilient young man. The ghosts of the past did not haunt him. They became a part of his story, a testament to the family who had loved him and the aunt who had fought for him. Today is on September 29th. It is the anniversary of my brother Robert's death, a date that was once a symbol of my deepest sorrow and defeat. Now it is a day of quiet reflection. I am sitting in our garden, a place I have lovingly restored. It is filled with my brother's favorite hydrangeas, my sister-in-law's beloved roses, and in a small serene corner, a collection of rare and beautiful orchids I have begun to cultivate, a nod to a wider world of beauty and resilience. Leo, now a thoughtful and confident teenager, is sitting with me. We are looking through one of Laura's old photo albums, the real one, the one filled with happy, authentic memories. I often think about the nature of the stories we leave behind. I spent my life in archives, believing that truth was a static thing, a fact to be preserved on a piece of paper or in a bound volume. I have learned that truth is a living thing. It can be buried, it can be silenced, it can be painted over with lies, but it is never truly gone. Sometimes it takes a small, brave boy and the ghost in a forgotten machine to bring it back into the light. My role in this family was not just to be the caregiver, the quiet sister, the loving aunt. It was to be the archivist of our truth, the guardian of our real story. And in saving that story from the woman who tried to burn it to the ground, I did not just deliver justice for the dead. I built a new, stronger, and more honest future for the living. And in this quiet, peaceful garden, surrounded by the love of the past and the promise of the future, I am finally, truly home.